Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about the production possibilities frontier, or the production possibilities curve. So this is the production possibilities frontier for a country that uses all of its resources to produce either healthcare or education, or some combination of the two. And so here we have healthcare on the vertical axis and education on the horizontal axis. And you can think of the units for both of the axes as being, well, either the amount of healthcare or education provided, or something like the benefit to society from healthcare or from education. So for at point D here, let's just say, then we have this amount of health care and society is getting that much benefit from it. Whereas at the same time, we have all of this education, and so society is getting all of this benefit from education. Okay, so now let's think about why the production possibilities frontier has this shape, that is, this curve that it does. And to do that, let's look at what happens when we go from point A to point B, and then from point B to point C. All right, so one reason why the production possibilities frontier has this shape is because when we go from point A to point B, we gain a pretty good amount of education, this amount here, and we only give up this tiny little bit of healthcare. And then when we go from point B to point C, we again gain a pretty good bit of education, the same amount in fact, and we don't lose too much health care. This much here, which is more than we lost when we went from point A to point B, but it's still not that much. We're gaining more education than we're losing in terms of health care when we go from B to C. Okay, so that's one way of explaining why the production possibilities frontier has this shape. The opportunity cost of adding education, that is, the amount of health care that we have to give up to add some education, is not constant. To get from 0 to 1 down here, it's only a tiny little bit, this little bit here. To get from 1 to 2, it's a little bit more healthcare, and it will continue to increase as we add more and more education. We'll have to give up more and more healthcare. Okay, so that's one way of explaining it, but we still might wonder why, as we add more education, why is it that we have to give up more and more healthcare? And vice versa. The same will work if we go in the other direction. The reason is because when we move from point A to point B, we are taking resources that weren't very effective at producing healthcare, and we're using them to produce education. And these are resources that are very effective at producing education. For instance, you can imagine that there are some people who, if they see a little bit of blood, they immediately faint. But these same people are great at teaching math or reading or whatever it might be. So these workers, they aren't very useful for producing health care, but they're very useful for producing education. And so those are the resources. Workers are one type of resource. Those are the resources that we took away from producing health care and put toward producing education when we went from A to B. Then when we move from point B to point C, we are again taking resources from healthcare and putting them toward education. But now the resources that we are shifting, workers or any other resources, are ones that are a little more suited to producing healthcare, or at least a little more suited than the first ones we moved. But they're resources that only provided this much benefit when they were devoted to healthcare, and they're producing this much benefit when they're devoted to education. Okay, so we can continue this story. If we get down here to point D, we find the opposite. If we take the resources that are producing this much health care and start using them to produce education, then we lose this amount of health care and we only gain this teeny tiny, can't even really see it, little bit of education. So the resources that we've shifted here are, I don't know, let's say brilliant doctors who save lots of lives, but when you put them in a classroom, they can't even take attendance or whatever it might be. Okay, so next, let's briefly look at this example here. So this, again, is a production possibilities frontier. And this is one for a small country that puts all of its resources towards producing either burritos or meatball subs or some combination of both. I know, it sounds amazing. Okay, and here we have numbers on both axes. So let's say that these are the number of burritos or the number of meatball subs that can be produced in an hour. And again, just like any time we're talking about a country using all of its resources to produce one thing or another, some of its resources are going to be better suited for one thing, for producing one good, and some are going to be better suited to producing something else. And some can be equally well suited to producing either one. That's fine also, but some will be better for one thing than the other. Okay, so let's say that this country is using all of its resources to produce burritos, and it's not producing any meatball subs. And so it's at this point right here. Then, if it decides to shift some of its resources to meatball subs, let's say that it starts producing 15 meatball subs. So it goes from there to there. So to do that, it has to give up 5 burritos from 60 to 55. And in fact, since this is curved here, every meatball sub that we add from 1 to 15 is going to have a slightly different opportunity cost. But anyway, when we add these first 15 meatball subs, we give up 5 burritos. Okay, then if we want to add another 15 meatball subs, let's see, we'll get to here, then we have to give up, it looks like 8 burritos. So the cost of adding these meatball subs from number 16 to 30, adding each one of them, the cost of doing that is higher than it was for those first 15. And we would find the same thing throughout the curve. Let's just look at the last 15. So if we're here, 45 meatball subs, and we decide to go all the way to 60, all resources being used to produce meatball subs, how many burritos do we lose? Looks like 33. So to go from 45 to 60, we have to give up 33 burritos. The reason for this is because when we're talking about a country using all of its resources to produce one good or another, some of those resources are going to be better suited to one thing, burrito production, say, and other resources are going to be better suited to producing something else. For instance, meatball subs. Okay, I'll stop here. Do the reading.